Hey guys, we're just going to give just a few more minutes just to wait for a couple more people to join, but I do see that we do have some attendees there, so thank you for that. But I'm just going to let it have maybe just 1 or 2 more minutes here just to allow some more people to join. Again, just probably 1 more minute, but I do see some more people that are joining, so that's pretty awesome. Thank you. All right. Looks like this is about a good time to start. So just want to say good morning or afternoon for some of you. Thank you for joining the first installment of our Modern Work Security Series webinars. My name is Lori Martinez, and I am a Modern Work Solution Specialist here to help moderate and assist with answering your questions. So why are we putting these webinars together? As Microsoft employees, we hear and see a lot of the ever-evolving threat landscape. Especially after these past 2 years, the world has pressured most organizations to speed up their digital transformation as remote and hybrid work become the very new normal. We at Microsoft want to make sure that you are empowered, prepared, and aware of the features that are included in our security solutions, and we want you to know that we're here to help. Today, we will be discussing some of the features of our Azure AD Plan 1 license. Our speakers today are Modern Work Technical Specialists, Shay Awojobi and Alicia Martinez. We also have a forward from Digital Sales Representative, Jada Fisher. Please feel free to post questions in the chat. I'll be helping to moderate that. And if you happen to have any additional questions or want more information that maybe we didn't cover, please reach out to your dedicated sales specialist or preferred partner. And with that, I'm handing it off to Jada Fisher.
Thank you so much, Lori, and good morning, everyone. As Lori mentioned, my name is Jada Fisher, and I'm a digital sales representative for Modern Workplace, which is where productivity and collaboration meet security and compliance. So I support our customers through their cloud journey or journey to optimal security posture by providing insights specifically across the licensing that support your initiatives. So with today's focus being Azure Active Directory, it is designed to empower organizations with more demanding identity and access management needs. And you can leverage Azure AD to control access to your apps and more. So our hope after today's presentation is that you'll have a better understanding of how Microsoft helps our customers determine things like who can access their corporate data, distinguish different levels of access for users, or something as simple as how we enable users to self-manage their passwords. So if you find that identity and access management are top priorities for your organization, or if you have any questions related to how you can integrate Azure AD into your technology environment, that's where you would leverage someone like me, your digital sales representative. And I will pass it along to Alicia and Shay.
Hey, Jada. Yeah, thank you very much for that introduction. My name is Alicia Martinez. I am a digital technical specialist here at Microsoft, and I cover the modern workplace stack. So that's encompassing any of the capabilities or features within Office 365 or M365. So as Jada and Lori mentioned, today we're going to be focusing on the topic of identity, as that's kind of the foundational element of the digital transformation journey. So if some of you may or may not be familiar with the concept of zero trust. So first, we're going to talk about why zero trust and how kind of this came together for Microsoft. So at Microsoft, we build our security solutions around 3 core principles, right? So we want to move from an assumption to explicit verification. So what does that mean? Anytime that someone's trying to access the Batcave, we want to be sure that that person is in fact that person and not pretending to be somebody else. we want to adopt a policy-based least privilege access model. So how are we making sure that we are granting this access to our resources to the right people, but not just that, but at the right time, right? Not a minute before and not a minute after. And then lastly, we want to design with the assumption that every element of your system can be breached. So with that in mind, when that breach happens, how are we architecting, or what kind of protocols do we have in place that can help minimize the lateral movement across our environment? So the concept of zero trust really is a security framework that Microsoft helped to design in order to help today's organizations, more effectively manage the complexity of the new remote workforce. Zero trust controls and technologies cover 6 foundational elements. Of course, like I said, today we're going to be talking about identities. So we want to make sure that we are verifying our identities with strong authentication. When we're thinking about our devices, we want to be sure that the devices that are accessing our resources are compliant and are healthy so as to not overexpose ourselves to any potential security vulnerabilities. Of course, all of our users on these devices need to be able to access our data, and we want to make sure that, of course, users are able to access the data. They need to be productive, but we want to do that without compromising security. So how can we make sure, no matter where or what kind of device is accessing this data, how can we ensure that the data itself is safe and protected, no matter where it might move? When we look at applications, we are able to leverage zero trust to apply controls and technology to help discover, let's say, shadow IT, for example. When we're thinking about infrastructure, again, remembering that least privilege access model, right? We can deploy just-in-time access to harden our defense, use telemetry to detect attacks and anomalies, but also automatically block and flag risky behavior to take protective actions. And from a zero trust standpoint, we really want to not only help organizations manage the complexities of today's workforce, but we also want to help, kind of empower users to be move from reactive to proactive with some of our automated processes and tools. So it goes without saying that pretty much everybody experienced the shift from the traditional work in office model to this hybrid remote workforce, right? So we've felt the shift of having, the comfort of going into an office and working on a company provided device. Instead, today, we have users signing in from a multitude of locations, using a wide variety of devices, be that company employed or something within their own personal ecosystem. And during this shift to this hybrid remote workforce, IT teams were really burdened with the task of enabling an environment that allowed users to maintain their levels of productivity without compromising their security posture. And as always, amongst the chaos, right, a bad actor is not going to pause and take a break and allow you to kind of catch up to speed. We saw last year alone a 300% increase in identity-related attacks. Not only that, as our walls become less tangible and users and organizations and collaborations is kind of spanning across different kinds of borders, there might also be some additional needs for specific security or compliance regulations that we also need to adhere to. And so Microsoft said, well, this is a lot of components that organizations need to take into account for. So how can we make how can we simplify or try to kind of streamline that approach so that organizations aren't feeling bogged down or overwhelmed by needing to account for all of these things to manage their new workforce? And as I mentioned, today's focus is going to be identity, really because at the foundation of it all, everything that connects to your or that's connected in your environment is kind of controlled through the identity plane, right? So what are some of the things that you should be able to expect or that you should be able to expect from your identity solution? Well, presumably we want to be able to have some level of guarantee that we can connect everything, all of the resources that we access within our environment. Ideally, we want to have some level of visibility across the entire digital estate. Of course, we want to make sure that the right people have the right access, to the right resources, and we can keep those bad actors outside of our environment. Microsoft accomplishes that with our identity solution known as Azure Active Directory. So within Azure Active Directory, Microsoft has created a universal identity platform that helps you to manage and secure all of your users and all of the access to your applications, right? And with, over 200,000 organizations trusting Azure AD and, analyzing over literally 30 billion authentication requests, we know that this solution has proved its viability, and we've proved it at a large scale. So with Microsoft and our investment in our identity platform, really what we're looking to do is meet organizations regardless of where they're at in their digital transformation. Of course, as we know, the most ideal situation is to be for all of our endpoints, all of our components, all of our users, everything to be 100% in the cloud, right? That's the super pristine ideal future. And while that might be ideal for the future, we understand that it's not realistic for today. The reality is many organizations are still leveraging applications and resources that are on-prem that either can't be modernized or are not ready to be modernized at this time, right? But with Azure Active Directory, you still have the ability to, not only cover all of your on-prem infrastructure, but and then in turn, you're able to leverage the cloud security capabilities today. So when you route your authentication through Azure AD, you are getting full visibility to your control plane. Not only are you able to have visibility over each access session, but you also can see the resources that are being accessed and the conditions of that access. Right? We take that a little step further when we enable multi-factor authentication with conditional access, which we'll cover in a few moments. So when we think about deploying Azure Active Directory, we have a couple of authentication options, right? So of course, you can be authenticated directly within Azure AD with no other identity store. However, we want to also be sure that we are able to account for the on-prem identity footprint. Given the fact that credential theft is one of the most common causes of data breach, it's very important to bridge our hybrid identity infrastructure across on-prem and the cloud so we can enable a single common user identity so users don't have separate credentials and multiple personas for each solution. We accomplish this bridge with a hybrid deployment of Azure AD with your on-prem Active Directory synced via a tool called Azure AD Connect. I know that is a mouthful, but you will hear me say it again. So through this hybrid identity approach, you have two options or two recommended options for modern authentication. So first, it's known as pass-through authentication. In pass-through authentication, the authentication is routed through Azure AD, but the credentials are confirmed via a lightweight agent that sits on-prem. The credentials are not stored in Azure AD in any capacity. Alternatively, we have password hash sync, and that is hard for me to pronounce no matter how many times I say it. So I'm going to say password hash sync, or PHS. With PHS, no additional on-prem footprint is required. Passwords are still not stored within Azure AD. Instead, the authentication is against multiple layers of encryption of the user's password. From a Microsoft best practices standpoint, PHS is the recommended authentication method for organizations because with there being no on-prem dependence, users can still access all of their resources, even if on-prem systems were to have an outage. So once you've chosen your authentication method, then you can look forward to some of the additional features and simple, seamless sign-on experiences that you can take advantage of as well in leveraging Azure AD as your identity solution. So Azure Active Directory provides several options for a single sign-on environment. Of course, with the reality that some applications simply or some resources simply cannot be modernized or are not ready to be modernized, you still can have the ability to connect all of your applications and maintain business productivity without compromising your security, even in a hybrid deployment. Solutions within Azure AD, like Azure AD App Proxy, and additional integrations with network security companies help simplify access to applications that use legacy authentication protocols, as we can see here on the screen. Through leveraging Azure AD App Proxy, it eliminates the need to access these on-prem applications via a VPN or a reverse proxy. Now with these tools, Azure AD Connect, Azure AD App Proxy, you now have the ability to have a centralized access management to all of your applications within one solution. So now we're accounting for all of our cloud apps, Microsoft or third party, in addition to all of our on-prem resources that we leverage as well. So now that we have all of our applications, all our resources in one control plane, what are some of the options that Azure AD supports for authentication? So we have a number, right? Like I said, the just traditional username and password is not as secure, especially today in today's modern work environment, right? So again, referencing our zero trust principles, we want to never trust and make sure we are always verifying each access request. So it's very important that users attempting to access resources have at least one additional check before they're actually granted access to our corporate data. Without those additional checks, passwords are indeed the weakest link, single point of failure in our security chain. So if you take away nothing else, at an absolute minimum, it is strongly recommended you enable MFA within your environment, which that check alone can help prevent 99.9% of identity attacks. But what kind of methods do we have to actually process that authentication? So there are several options within Azure AD. From a mobile standpoint, we have the Microsoft Authenticator app. This utilizes soft tokens, which allow users to receive a push notification, a one-time passcode, depending on their device, can also leverage biometric authentication. And this application is free and available to download in both the Apple and Android application stores. From a PC standpoint, we have Windows Hello. It's a built-in experience, again, leveraging biometric authentication via fingerprint or facial recognition. And then lastly, we have FIDO2 security keys, which are now supported within Azure AD as well for hard token authentication. Of course, though this is a very strong recommendation, we understand that some organizations might have some apprehension about turning on MFA. You know, just the thought of being prompted for, you know, a passcode or a token, whatever it is, every single time you try to access an application, that's obviously going to inhibit productivity, right? However, with Azure AD, we take it a step further, and when we enable our MFA, we also pair that with what's known as conditional access to kind of help reduce the potential of MFA fatigue. So conditional access. Conditional access is an intelligent policy that allows you to define the conditions for how a user authenticates and gains access to your apps or data. So with conditional access, we're analyzing over 171 terabytes of identity-related security signals, right? So beyond just the user credentials, we have the user's behavior. Where are they signing in from? What kind of device? What's the state of that device, etc. With machine learning, conditional access is able to analyze these signals and determine the correct response to these access requests, right? So are we going to allow? Are we going to limit? Are we going to request additional verification, or are we going to block access altogether? So let's say you have a policy enabled that requires multi-factor authentication whenever a user signs in from a new location. When that request happens and a user attempts to sign in from an unfamiliar location, they'll get an additional verification prompt before they're given access. Or even better, let's say that you specified there are some locations that you simply just don't trust. In that event, instead of asking for an additional verification, access will simply be blocked completely. So leveraging something like conditional access, once again, allows you to be one, proactive, and two, kind of automate your access management capabilities in having these smart, intelligent protocols kind of built into the solution. So within Azure AD, I think the biggest point that I'd like to drive before, if you leave with nothing else, right, is Azure AD aims to kind of be this all-encompassing solution that, you know, not only factors in Microsoft, you know, cloud applications, but also third-party applications, on-prem solutions or resources, but also take a kind of account to the B2B kind of collaborations and the B2C collaborations that we need and have kind of taken over for many of our organizations, right? The need to kind of manage that guest access without compromising our security, right? And we believe very powerfully that Azure AD is in fact that answer. And as the investment deepens on our end and the tool grows, there are new capabilities and new functionalities that are added to the solution on an ongoing basis, right? So our hope is Azure AD will continue to evolve to serve all of our customer and partner-facing use cases and scenarios. And then lastly, as I kind of mentioned, I highlighted a little bit earlier, right? The kind of aim here is to how can we empower, you know, not only IT teams, right, but also users to have more transformative, seamless experiences. One of those things is enabling self-service capabilities. So just for example, we have self-service password reset. Instead of having all of these password reset requests going to our IT teams, we have the ability to set up self-service so that users can manage their own kind of credentials and free up our IT teams to focus on more strategic initiatives. So that brings me kind of to the end of the presentation piece of our Azure AD P1 solution. And now I can transition over to Shay, who will take you all through a demo of the Azure AD portal.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Alicia, for that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll take it over. Awesome. All right. Thank you everyone once again for being a part of our webinar today on Azure AD Premium Plan 1. As Alicia said, she's kind of laid that foundation for us. And walking through the demo environment, I'd like to show us a couple of things, just as she has highlighted in our presentation. Now, the foundation for every identity story or every Azure AD story literally starts with the users, right? We've talked about how to breach that gap between your on-premises environment and your cloud environment, leveraging Azure AD Connect. But a question that a lot of customers would ask is, all right, so when I do that, where do I manage my identities? Would I manage them on premises or would I manage them in the cloud? The answer to that is you are able to do that management within the Azure AD tenants, meaning within the cloud environment. And as you can see here, I have a number of users in this environment. Right here under directory synced, we see that some of these users say no because they are cloud identities. However, we do see some users here who have been synchronized from our on-premises environment into the cloud. And as we scroll down, this is not just applicable to users, it's also applicable for your groups and whatnot. And of course, you can click into those users and start that management process for those identities that are whether in the cloud or on premises. Now, so knowing that you can manage your identities in your Azure environment, rather, the next question that people would ask is, okay, that's taken care of. What if, which is one of the benefits of Azure AD Premium, is the ability to enable self-service password reset. What if I also want to enable self-service password reset for my users who are on premises? And the answer to that is yes. Now, as we go about our identity journey or our security journey, what we want to ensure is to, of course, start automating a lot of things, start empowering our end users to do more, and start making sure that really our end users are empowered for more, saving our help decks a lot of time from doing the routine tasks and being more productive in other stuff. With Azure AD P1, you are able to enable self-service password reset for all your users. And again, with that on-premises integration, whether it's pass-through authentication or password hash synchronization, whichever you choose to go with, you are able to get that password write back benefit. Of course, there are a couple of settings that you need to enable in your on-premises environment, but within the cloud infrastructure, you just need to toggle this on, make sure that the password write back toggle is enabled, and that way when your users, your on-premises identities change their password within the cloud, within their browsers, it is reflected as well on premises. It is written back on premises. And of course, you have the ability to also choose what authentication methods you want people to use, your end users to use, whether it's just one method while resetting their password or it's two methods. You have the flexibility to determine what that would be. A question that people would ask is, for security questions, am I able to create my own security questions? Do you have some custom questions in place? Yes, we have some custom questions in place, but you are also able to create your own questions as well. Now, once you take care of the identities, right, the next thing a lot of customers are thinking about is, okay, I have tons of applications in my environment. I have like SaaS, third-party SaaS applications. I have on-premises applications. And of course, I have the Microsoft applications we need to deal with. How do I make sure that that is easy to access? How do I make sure that my users can get a seamless experience, leveraging single sign-on to use one credential to access all of these tons of applications? And that is something that you achieve with Azure AD as well. If we go right here, we went into enterprise applications and you click on new application. Within the Azure AD gallery, right, you have cloud platforms that you can integrate with to enable single sign-on. You have some on-premises applications. So just like Alicia talked about, with Azure AD Application Proxy, you're able to enable integrate your on-premises applications that support those legacy authentication protocols like Kerberos, NTLM, etc. and integrate them into Azure AD, removing the need for reverse proxy or VPN and making sure your users can access that app from the browser. And the good thing about this is while you're integrating that application into Azure AD, you're also getting the benefit of the cloud on those applications, meaning you're getting conditional access, you're getting MFA, you're getting access reviews and whatnot. Now, alongside on-premises applications, we also have tens of thousands of applications that are already integrated into the Azure AD Gallery that you can enable single sign-on for. And the great thing about this is when you click into that application that you want to enable single sign-on for, we have documentations that can guide you through the process of setting it up. So right here, assuming I wanted to, let's use another app, assuming I wanted to integrate into Google Cloud, I have all the various, you're able to see here on a visual standpoint, all the various single sign-on methods or modes that are available. You can see all the various functionalities that you can take advantage of, like automatic provisioning, which is also a feature you get with Azure AD P1, which simply means that you can create an identity within Azure AD and have that reflect in the other application that you're using, or you can remove a user, also deprovision a user in Azure AD and have the same experience in the other application as well. And like I highlighted at the beginning, the goal of this is to automate a lot of this process and save you a lot of time from doing a lot of the manual stuff. And like I said, for every application that is integrated, you can click into the documentation and you get step-by-step guide, as you can see here, on how to integrate that application into your Azure AD environment and enable that single sign-on benefit. Now, the thing is, for every of this thing, if there's something you want to go ahead and get started with, you have questions about, feel free to put them in the chat, but you can also reach out to your Microsoft representative and we'll be happy to kind of guide you through that process as well. Now, for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to take us through an application that I've already integrated for Azure AD and just kind of show you what the end user experience looks like with single sign-on. Now, the use case here, I'm going to close this. The use case for this application is this customer, this user, or this organization currently uses G Suite for, collaboration, for their emails and whatnot, but they would like Azure AD to be the source of truth from an identity standpoint. So what we have done is we've gone ahead to leverage the Microsoft documentation, integrate G Suite into this infrastructure. And for this, I've also gone ahead to add, so here we can see some of my single sign-on policies or settings are already listed here. So everything has been configured. I've also gone ahead to add specific users and groups within the application. Now, one thing I want to point out here, which is also a feature of Azure AD P1, is the dynamic group creation. What I've done here is I've created a group and I've made it a dynamic group, saying that if any user with this UPN, with this value, is added into my Azure AD environment, I want them to automatically be added into this group. So I don't have to create a user and then create a group and then add the user to the group. As soon as I create a user and that user and these rules are met, they are automatically added to that group. So from a management standpoint, again, from an automation standpoint, that saves you a lot of time. Now, once that is done, what we see here is for this particular application, because I have this group assigned here, once I have that user in my org and the values match, they automatically also applied or assigned rather to the application involved, which is here the G Suite application. So what we are going to do next, we're going to look into this group. And the great thing about this is whatever user is being provisioned here is also being provisioned into my into my G Suite environment, because again, we have that automatic provisioning enabled. So what we're going to do here now is we're going to test what the end user experience looks like. I have some users here. I'm going to be using this user to sign into my G Suite environment. So I'm going to pull up another screen again. And what I'm going to do first is go back to the G Suite application, pull up the single sign-on link, the sign-on URL, which is this one. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and then pull that screen up again. Now we're going to put that in the chat, in the box. Go ahead and hit enter. And what we see here is we're seeing a Microsoft experience, right? The end user comes in not signing into Gmail anymore. They're signing into Microsoft or into Azure AD. I will go ahead and put in the credentials for that user. So let's just Ctrl V. Oops, no. Let's type it in. Go ahead and put that in and sign in. And what we want to see next, oops, I'm typing nonsense. What we want to see next is what does that end user experience look like? How seamless is it for the end user to sign into the application? The next thing that is happening here is asking me to insert my password, which is what I will do next. And once I do that, of course, there's the KMSI, keep me signed in prompt. Go ahead and click on that. And what happens next is I have access into my G Suite environment, right? I can go ahead and get started, go ahead and leverage all the various G Suite applications that might have been assigned to me, and I'm ready to get productive as a G Suite user, right? So it is possible for you to leverage, I show you this to say it is possible for you to leverage Azure AD to integrate into whatever application that you might be using in your organization, whether it's on-prem, whether it's cloud, whether it's Microsoft, and still get, again, that security benefit of conditional access and MFA. Now, if there is an application that you want to integrate with that is not already here, you are able to request that that application be added into the Azure AD environment. All right, so having talked about that, let's look at some other things. Let's go into security. So we have enabled single sign-on. We know that our users can now use one credential to access these various apps. How can we secure their access? How can we make sure that their experience is secure? They're staying productive, but our organization, our data stays secure. The next step there is to start thinking about multi-factor authentication and conditional access. My colleague Alicia talked about some of the authentication methods that we have. The great thing about using Azure AD P1 in comparison to the free version is with the free version, everybody gets MFA and everybody's triggered for an MFA prompt every time. You don't have the flexibility to control how that is managed. You don't have the flexibility to define what categories of people should get MFA prompts with what authentication methods. With Azure AD P1, you're able to say, okay, these groups of people should use FIDO2 security keys. These groups of people should use the Microsoft Authenticator app, I have favorite. Some people should use the temporary access pass, which goes into passwordless. You're able to get really granular on how you want to control your multi-factor authentication rollout. You also have the ability with P1 to do password protection, meaning are there some specific passwords you don't want people to use? Are there some easy to get passwords that you don't want people to use? You want to make sure that you can block that as well and secure your organization even more. But let's go back to security and let's go into conditional access and talk through that for a little bit. So as you can see here, I have a ton of conditional access policies that I've created. And what you can see is I've created conditional access policies across the various applications. I have my Microsoft 365 applications here. I have some third-party applications here, some other SaaS applications. And I also have some on-premises applications which I've created a conditional access policy for, which tells you that you can create policies across your infrastructure to make sure that you're exemplifying that zero trust concept. Now, one thing that is also fantastic is we now give you the opportunity to create new policies from templates. So if prior to now, you're wondering, oh my God, how do I start this process of deploying or starting my security journey? I don't know what policies to create. We have made that easy for our customers by creating templates that you can use to get that journey started. So you're following some of our best practices. You know what policies to create and you're good to go. But for the purpose of this demo, I am going to create a policy from scratch and just walk you through what that looks like. So of course, the first thing we want to do is to give that policy a name. We want that name to be as descriptive as possible. I'll just write webinar test for this. The next thing you want to do is to define who should this policy apply to. So are there some specific users in your organization, maybe your top level executives that you definitely do not want them to be compromised, or you want them to absolutely be secure when they're accessing specific things? What you want to do is think about the groups of people that you want to assign this policy to. It could be for everybody, right? You could just assign it to everybody, or you could have really specific people that you want to assign it to. So let's say for here, we're doing everybody, but we're excluding certain people. That's also something that is possible. We can exclude Adele from this policy, for example. Now, another thing, outside of users and groups, you have the opportunity to also target workload identities. So if there are some service principals that you want to assign this policy to, you have the ability to target those policies to them as well. Now, once you define who your users are, so you're saying, hey, if this user the next thing you're trying to do is at what point should we look at this conditional access policy? And here is where we define that. We can say when this user is trying to access a cloud application or is trying to perform a specific action like register a new security information or register a new device. Those are things that are important to create policies for security policies for. Or when they're trying to do any sort of authentication context, you can create policies based on things like that. But let's work with cloud apps for today. Here you can target all cloud applications that you have, or you can say, I want to target specific applications across the 3 environments, my Office 365 environment, my third-party SaaS application that I might be using. So let's say we have Salesforce, right? We can go ahead and say, I want to target my Salesforce environment application. And I also want to target an on-premises application that I have. Here I have this on-premises application called the demo app, which I have integrated again into Azure AD with the app proxy feature. You're saying here, if these groups of users are trying to access any of these applications, then you define your condition. What should we look at? What should we check out for? This first 2 features here, user risk and sign-in risk, are part of our Azure AD P2 feature, which is our risk-based identity protection, where we're saying if a user, for example, is, the password has been detected on the dark web, or they just seem risky, you want to put additional checks. For sign-in risk, we're saying, hey, if this user's, the IP address looks malicious, we see atypical travel, impossible travel, you want us to check that and do additional checks before letting them into your environment. That's something that you get as part of the P2 feature, which we'll talk about in the upcoming webinar. But with P1, you're able to filter by device platforms, right? If there are some devices you would never use in your environment, you can restrict that and say, if this person is signing in from that device, then I want you to block access, right? We're not going to configure this one, but you can do locations. You can say, if this user is signing in from a trusted location or from a select location, maybe you're within the corporate network, we don't need to require MFA, or maybe you're signing in from a country we would never do business with, then block that access from coming through. You have the ability to define locations based off countries and based off IP addresses. So that is a feature that you can definitely take advantage of. In this case, we're saying, if these groups of users are signing into this application from a non-trusted country, I want you to look at this policy. You can also define, what client apps are they signing in with? Is it modern authentication clients or legacy authentication clients? You can create policies based off that. And you can also create policies based off specific devices. So you can say, if someone is signing in with a device ID or an operating system of this value, right, you want to check that login experience. Now, once you define what your conditions are, in this case, I've only defined one, then you define, all right, Microsoft, you have seen all of these things, you have seen the controls, you have seen the conditions, what happens next? You can then tell us what you want us to happen. Do you want us to block that access? Do you want us to allow it, but require MFA? Or require a password change? What do you want us to do? Do you want us to require all 2 of these controls or just one of them? What would you like us to do? Those are things that you can spell out as well. Now you see here things like require device to be marked as compliant, require hybrid Azure AD joined devices. That is something that also ties into Endpoint Manager, where we're checking the compliance status of your device. And these are things we'll talk about as well in upcoming webinars. Now, once you define what the control will be, go ahead and select this. We then define what happens within the session. Do you want us to do things like sign-in frequency, require this person to sign in every couple of hours or days? Do you want us to restrict what they can do within the application, right? You're able to set your session controls as well when creating those policies. Now, once you do that, the next thing you can go ahead and do here is enable that policy or report only. We typically recommend for a start, you kind of test it out by doing the report only just to see how the policy is working out. And then after a while, you can enable it for the entire organization. But once you do that, you create your policy and you will be good to go. So that is what that looks like from a conditional access standpoint. But let's talk a little bit about named locations. Like I mentioned earlier, you have the ability to define locations that you trust or do not trust, whether by countries or by IP ranges. That is something that you can definitely do from within here. Now, having talked a little bit about security, let's go back and just talk a little bit about the external identities, which we have referred to while the presentation was going on. So for a lot of customers, we know that it is important to partner with people, to partner and collaborate well effectively with our external partners, suppliers, when there's a merger and an acquisition. How do we make that happen? How do we make that experience seamless? With external identities, that is possible. You're able to invite other identity providers without the dependency of managing those identities on you. So you can use they can use their Gmail accounts, their Facebook accounts, or whatever to access your application without any dependency on you to manage the identity. Of course, you can then create security policies to make sure that you're staying secure, right? But you can invite those identities into your environment to collaborate. Now, in a situation where it is none of these identities, it is not an Azure AD credential, it's not Google, it's not Microsoft account of Facebook, if this person is using this organization that you're purchasing or this organization that you're partnering with is using a third-party identity provider, you have the ability, as long as that identity provider supports SAML and WSFED protocols, you have the ability to invite them into your organization to kind of collaborate and make that process seamless. So it's easy to share files. It's easy to collaborate effectively and complete that acquisition process as you're thinking about it. And for a lot of this as well, if you want to go deeper and have a better understanding of this, feel free to reach out to your Microsoft representative, and we'll be happy to take those questions and guide you through the process. Now, on a final note, just to talk a little bit about some of the functionalities that you get with P2, which we'll be talking about in the coming weeks. With Azure AD P2, you get things like access reviews. Again, from an automation standpoint, I'm inviting a guest user into my environment as a use case. A supplier or a partner is going to be working with me for the next 3 months. I want to make sure that after 3 months, I don't have to go manually to check that they still have accesses. I want to automatically provision that access. With access reviews, you're able to create automatic reviews of that user's access, of that external user, or even internal user's access, to say, if this person that still has access to this application by 2 months after, I want you to send them an email to check if they still need it, or send someone else who knows them an email, or their manager. And once that person clicks, hey, I don't need this access anymore, you can automatically deprovisions the access. With Azure AD P2 comes conversations around identity governance, around access packages, where someone is joining the organization and you can easily assign everything that they need to make their job easy. So the applications they need, the Teams groups, the Microsoft 365 groups they need, everything really that they need to make their day-to-day job successful. You can assign that package to them. They go ahead and request access and they're good to go. Those are some of the things that we'll cover in the upcoming call. But in the meantime, I hope this has been educative. If you have any questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat. But at this time, I will go ahead and pass it over to Larry. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Shay. So thank you, Shay and Alicia, for that amazing presentation and demo of Azure Active Directory P1. At this time, I would like to point out that there are some of the upcoming webinars we have scheduled here. The next one being Azure Active Directory P2 on March 24th, which includes features such as risk-based conditional access, identity protection, and more. I will be placing the registration link here. If for any reason, maybe you didn't, sign up for Azure Active Directory or any of the other webinars that we do have coming up, please feel free to use that particular registration link to sign up for additional webinars. Since we have a few minutes left, if you have any questions that you would like to put in the chat that we can, answer, please feel free and we'll take them one by one. But if there are no questions, So I'm gonna wait just for a little bit to see. I know we have, it looks like we have a couple people still in here, so anything you guys want to ask, feel free. Thank you. And you can also see the registration link also online here. If there are no questions, we can end this a little bit early, but if after you process this information, if you find that, hey, I want some more information, I want to learn more, again, reach out to your Microsoft sales specialist or your preferred partner. But since we're coming up to the end of the hour and there are no additional questions that I can at least see in the Q&A, we'll be concluding this session. Recording will be made available to you for future reference. But if there's nothing else for you guys, I hope you found this informative, and I absolutely want to thank you so much for taking the time to visit with us and watch this webinar. So have a great day.